Day 1013 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 743,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,790 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 9 tanks, 28 APVs, and 30 artillery. And on this hardware loss topic, because amid what appears to be ongoing bans on personal civilian vehicles for use with Russia's SMO, a Russian military blogger paints a surreal picture of the frontline life as soldiers who are unable to access official military vehicles are resorting to going on foot or bicycles, with the Russian military blogger also stating that the situation resembles something straight out of a children's cartoon, with troops pedaling their way to deliver munitions, reach positions, and attend meetings. He also said that trekking tens of kilometers per day in full gear isn't exactly feasible, but many a time there's no other options. Perhaps in the not too distant future we'll see bicycles on this list too. Then very briefly, look into the ruble's opening week price, volatile but anywhere between 106 and 108 rubles per US dollar so far, which we could call a stabilization of the currency, but it's really only a stabilization after the devaluation of the currency, equal to a 12% devaluation since around this time last month. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Peskov tried to put this devaluing in a better light, talking about an erosion in the attractiveness of the world's reserve currency, that is the US dollar. But where have I heard that bleak outlook for the US dollar before? That's right, in pretty much every Soviet-Russian newspaper since the 1950s. Then headed straight to the Ukrainian map today as the AFU's 42nd Separate Mechanized Brigade successfully repelled a significant Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region, specifically near Vovchansk. The Ukrainian defenders were well prepared, resulting in enemy losses that included the destruction of 2 T-62 battle tanks and 2 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, along with damage to another 2 T-62 tanks and 1 APC. And from all of it, 27 wounded and 13 eliminated. And the fact that their total of 4 tanks utilized, only including the 1960s era T-62 tanks, by the world's second army, speaks volumes, and really says it all. Then, in addition to these ground engagements, Ukrainian forces utilized drones to target Russian armored vehicles, destroying an additional 2 near Buravatka, and another transporter near Murom. Then headed down the map and into the Kharkova direction of Ukraine, as AFU paratroopers have effectively countered a new series of relentless attacks from the Russian forces. This time they engaged a small and close proximity column of Russian armor, which included 2 tanks and 2 infantry fighting vehicles. Now, as soon as the AFU drones arrived on the scene, the Russian armor attempted to disperse, but they were swiftly dealt with by the decisive actions of the Ukrainian FPV operator unit in particular. There was also a number of strikes on small boats and personnel of the armed forces of Russia in the longer form video as well. And I must say, it's almost a fair characterization to call a lot of these engagements in the region as human versus robot engagements, because the ill-equipped and ill-trained Russian soldiers just keep getting physically sent in meat wave after meat wave, whereas the Ukrainian FPV units respond to these threats somewhere to the level that they are coming through. And yet, over time, the availability and proficiency of Russian mechanized manpower will decrease over time, whereas Ukrainian FPV units will grow. And not just grow in sheer numbers, but are also expected to have an evolutionary leap in capabilities due to fully fledged AI integration in as little as 4 months' time, based on my investigation of this matter. All of which somehow reminds me of the stark difference between these two armies here, where the Ukrainian army will cede land to save lives, whereas the Russian army really won't. And to that end, one could say to Ukraine, save your men until you reach this point of battlefield technological superiority. It's just a game of time, as is the destruction of the Russian economy, where it cannot continue to take such a sustained beating as it is now on most, if not all, the metrics that you can think of. Then elsewhere on the map, in fact in the Kursk region, as Ukraine's 129th TDF, which is the Territorial Defense Forces, continues to successfully fend off daily assaults in Plakovo of Kursk, as we can see here, and located southeast of this particular region. Then, somewhat adjacent to this location, but in Belarus, as in a bold move last night, partisans successfully halted and set a fire to a train. Indeed, a very significant act of defiance for the country, as this event highlights the ongoing resistance within the region. And although, while the details remain limited, this act would seem to underscore the growing resolve among those opposing the Uncle Luka regime. Then to Russia for a moment, as a fire erupted at a polystyrene production facility in Yekaterinburg, engulfing approximately 1,500 square meters. The plant has gained attention for its production of foamed polystyrene, a material currently used on the front lines to camouflage equipment from thermal imaging drones. Other components necessary for the production of drones are also manufactured there, or were manufactured there, because at 1,600 kilometers away, or almost exactly 1,000 miles away from the front lines of Ukraine, it's pretty safe to say that, based on what we see here, the manufacturing plant is toast. While the cause of the fire remains under investigation, just take your pick at what it could be. Drones, or partisan activity, or even from the very angry proprietors who have been forced by the Kremlin's hand to produce material for the war, even if the business is running at a loss because of it, leading to countless suspect cases now where the owners may have decided to self-immolate the plants. Then headed to a bit of news for today. So, upon his arrival to Kyiv, Chancellor Scholz unveiled a new military aid package from Germany valued at 650 million euros. According to a spokesperson for the German Defense Ministry, this military assistance is set to be delivered to Ukraine in December, and the package will include 2 Iris-T air defense systems, 10 Leopard 1 tanks, attack drones, winter gear, handguns, heating equipment, and additional supplies. Then to some more hardware news updates, Ukraine has just unveiled high-quality images of its new artillery piece, the towed Bodana 2S22 155mm howitzer. As you might guess, its howitzer barrel and components come direct from the self-propelled howitzer of the same name, and with a maximum firing range of 42 kilometers with standard Hefrag shells, it can vastly outrange any comparable Russian 152mm Soviet barrel platform, those of which have a range of between or up to 25 to 30 kilometers. Noting that that's under optimal conditions with barrel maintenance, but also based off Russia's own spec sheets, which are typically, more often than not, somewhat questionable. And as for the new Bodana pieces, these systems are likely to go into mass production sometime in the near future, which would supplement Ukraine's artillery capabilities. Then headed across to a Russian hardware news update, because in what appears to be an improvised solution, a Russian main battle tank has been outfitted, or literally strapped together with, a chaotic pile of electronic warfare jammers targeting various frequency bands, which was very needfully supported by a generator and battery, supplementary battery. So this setup aims to create a dense jamming field against drones, but also highlights the limitations of such ad hoc measures. Most jammers can only target a narrow frequency range at a time, and without proper technical integration, operator training, and coordination, this approach risks inefficiency and device interference, as simply stacking jammers on vehicles or in trenches won't effectively counter drones without addressing these critical operational factors. Case in point, this setup failed to jam inbound AFU drones. Conversely, the armed forces of Ukraine have a very inter-networked setup with real-time information on what requested frequency bands are to be used and what's not to be used, but also details on what the enemy bands are for any given region. So it's a real-time data luxury that's simply not afforded to the Russian army. Hence the monstrosity that we see here before us. Plus, the parallels in the battlefield cannot go unnoticed here. As one could say, the Russian approach to electronic warfare jammers seems to be almost the exact same approach to their meatwave attacks. Just pile them on with no configuration, optimization, and so on, and see if that works. Then to some more news, as in a surprising twist of diplomatic relations, Russian Duma head Volodin's planned visit to India has been postponed indefinitely. And the reported reason behind this delay? The increase in rhetoric around nuclear threats stemming from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, where India has made it clear that it disapproves of any discussions surrounding tactical nuclear weapons, signaling that such threats could have broader implications for international diplomacy. Who would have thought? Threatening nuclear war has diplomatic consequences. Not exactly a BRICS-friendly moment. There's not too many of them. Then in some more news, President Putin has now greenlit a record defense budget for 2025, allocating a staggering 32.5%, or 13.5 trillion rubles, about 125 billion US dollars, to national defense. This marks an increase from 28% dedicated to defense in 2024 and up from 16% of total government expenditures in 2023. And so for a bit of context here, most countries spend anywhere between 6 to 13% on defense out of total government expenditures, noting that this is not to be confused with the much more advertised defense expenditure metric as a percentage of GDP, a different metric that generally is around 2 to 4%. So as far as Russian defense spendings go, effectively moving up to 1 in every 3 rubles spent on this war now. A terrible self-created status quo, which happens to be, for the moment, artificially sustaining their country's annual GDP, something which is not a sustainable practice because it's not value for money in terms of producing much from an economic standpoint, and an economic dynamic that also lends itself to steamrolling the economic decline of a society due to heavily limited resources for other critical and beneficial areas for the economy. So at these skyrocketing defense cost rates, if regular Russians didn't know any better, they'd probably think their country was at war. A term, by the way, that you still can't legally call the SMO in Russia. Truly astonishing. Then headed to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. Slightly darker of a funny, where Putin's recent visit to Kazakhstan had the Russian presentator emphasize the strong cultural and linguistic ties between Russia and Kazakhstan, stating that Kazakhstan is, quote, practically a Russian-speaking country, followed by old boy Tokayev, president of Kazakhstan, flipping the bird in a stealthy sense, responding with his own statements in the Kazakh language. But of course, for Putin to even say something like this, it could never be taken in the spirit of a friendly solidification of ties between nations ever again. After all, wasn't this use of language one of the ever-changing 100 reasons for Russia to invade Ukraine in the first place? Something to the effect of protecting the Russian-speaking population of the Donbass, and so on. So there is no way in which Kazakhstan would take this type of Putinist rhetoric in good light, because all it does is set up the expectation that Russia has long-term goals to militarily take over their country as well. And truly, they would if they could. Putin has not done himself any favors here by making his true intentions known to everybody else, whether he realizes it or not. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. And yeah, I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!